Recognized Uncle Walker D01. Recognized Rogue TLDR D10.
Today in the cave, we have not only one of my favorite podcasters, but one of my favorite people in the podcast industry, Pranks Paul, host of the Star Wars discussion podcast, Never Tell Me the Pods. If you've heard our episode 0, you have already heard Pranks' name, because Never Tell Me the Pods was one of the key podcasts that inspired Whelmed. Never Tell Me the Pods dives into the passionate fan base of Star Wars and leaves no novel, movie, comic, TV show unturned. If you think I know a thing or two about DC, just wait till Pranks and his guests blow your mind. Pranks, I am so happy to officially welcome you to the podcast that you helped inspire. Welcome to the cave, my friend.
I am overjoyed to be on this podcast that
you helped inspire?
That you started, and you constantly inspire me. So really, I'm just returning the favor. Could I have said that in a more awkward way?
Possibly, but I think it was a good first draft.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get 47 more of these takes, and then
52. We do 52, either 16 or 52.
We should do 16, I think, actually, right?
Right. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our discussion episodes draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series, both seasons so far, now I get to say, the comics and the video game. If you have not seen, read, or played all of the material and are spoiler wary, consider this your warning.
I may also delve into DCAU stuff, of which there will be spoilers too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No. Yeah, we basically spoil everything.
Yeah, this is going to ruin everything.
You just ruin everything, Pranks. Just ruin everything.
That's what I do.
I'm surprised we've gotten this far into the podcast without you punning something. We'll see how that goes.
Oh, I'm just waiting.
Uh-oh. With all that silliness, let's dive in.
Tim, you'll be running Gamma.
Me? Dick, I've never led a squad before.
Making this a good opportunity to get your feet wet as a field leader.
Because it's Gamma and you're not expecting trouble? Or because we're stretched thin and you have no choice?
Just don't die, okay?
I touched on a few things in the intro, particularly the Never Tell Me the Pods, but tell everyone else who doesn't know you a little more about who you are and what you do in the universe.
My name is Pranks Paul. I am a lawyer by day, and by night, I guess I am a Star Wars monster.
You are a Star Wars monster. You're a Star Wars superhero.
You know, I actually think Star Wars has a lot in common with the superhero genre, and if we touch on that in a later episode, I think that could be a fun sort of overlap thing. I mean, the Jedi alone, but...
Or this one.
Yeah, I host Never Tell Me the Pods, which is a therapy podcast for really me, Kat, James, and Johnny. We started Never Tell Me the Pods because I met James, Johnny, and Kat at a con, and I started sort of talking to them about Star Wars, and Kat and I basically instantly clicked in terms of how we were giant EU nerds and just crazy for this stuff.
Can you tell everybody, in case they don't know, what does EU mean?
Oh, the expanded universe. Not extended universe. Expanded universe. People constantly say extended, and it just raises my hackles. But you can also call it Legends, and that's also fine. Not to be confused with DC's Legends.
Can you describe what it is?
Sure. The expanded universe is the ecosystem of non-movie comics, novels, video games, short stories, and other ephemera that were outside of the realm of the 6 original Star Wars movies. The expanded universe actually preceded the movies because the Marvel Star Wars comic came out before the movie came out. The expanded universe was formally reset/rebooted in 2014 after Disney purchased Star Wars, but there are elements that are coming back into canon. I don't know how deep dive you want to...
Well, here's the deal. We're going to be talking about Young Justice in DC, but I mean, I assume a lot of our listeners have seen Star Wars and know a little bit about this, but I don't want to make any assumptions about anything. So
Perfect.
I want to make sure I want to make sure everybody knows kind of what we're talking about so we don't jargon it up too much and lose people.
Right. Well, jumping back, Kat and I both loved that body of work and material in addition to the movies. And after we saw episode 7, we just decided that we wanted to record kind of a one-off podcast and talk about our feelings, because we had started a thread where we just discussed speculation, rumors, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it evolved into a podcast. And the first day, we didn't even have it be about episode 7. We just decided to make it a full-fledged work. And so here we are, roughly a year after. I mean, we started in January first episode came out in March, and we've been recording pretty much ever since. We have 33 episodes out and like 36 or 37 in the can. So
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about why people need to go listen to that podcast. But basically, if you are listening to this podcast and you enjoy that kind of what we do here for Young Justice and you're a Star Wars fan, then you should kind of basically make sure you go over there and check out Never Tell Me the Pods, because it really was an inspiration for this podcast, including the fact that as soon as you said that was Star Wars therapy, I thought, you know what I need is some Young Justice therapy. And that's basically what this podcast is. And I thank you for it. So jumping back a little bit back to Young Justice a bit, like when did you first see it? Did you see it when it was first being released? Did you binge it on Netflix, on DVDs?
I watched it week by week when it came out.
Week by week, and then 6 months break, and then week by week, and then 3 month break, and then...
Don't remind me. Yeah. God, that was hard. That was during law school for me, too. So it was like I used to use that as breaks.
Yikes.
I would watch my friend and roommate, Michael Ben, who's been on Never Tell Me the Pods a few times. He and I, when we were living together.
He's the droid expert?
Yes, he's a droid expert. Oh, God, he'll be so jazzed to hear you say that. We just worked our way through various Batman-related material, and Young Justice entered the rotation when it came out. And so as we were working our way through the DCAU, we also watched Young Justice on a weekly basis.
Yeah. And DCAU, DC Animated Universe is what we're referring to,
Yes.
just so we don't lingo.
DC Animated Universe, not DC Extended Universe. That's the Zack Snyder thing, actually.
Fantastic. See, this is what you're going to get on Never Tell Me the Pods.
Pedantry!
Judgment and condescension.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so you already talked about a little bit. You were like cranking through some of the, Batman animated, DC animated stuff before you hit Young Justice. But what was your experience with comics? Had you read comics before this?
Yeah, my very first comic that I can recall when I was 3 or 4 was a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic. No, wait, that was when I was 5 or 6, I think. Yeah, it was a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic. Growing up, the comics that I read were like Ninja Turtles and Batman the Animated Series comics and Spider-Man.
You're killing me, Pranks.
And then
I feel so old.
When I was 8 or 9, no, this would have been in high school, actually. High school is when I sort of started investigating comics that were published at the time on my own initiative, and I got really into the Ultimate Spider-Man series. That was my sort of entry point into comics fandom, and then I just started reading everything. I read X-Men, I read Batman, I read Superman, and in college, I amassed just a gigantic Batman collection. Just as a point of comparison here, I'm looking to my right, which you cannot see, but I'm looking at my shelves, and the Batman shelf of comics is as long and full as my Star Wars source books. Not my Star Wars books, but my list of Star Wars source books.
Well played, sir. Well played.
I love Batman, and I've loved Batman for a very long time. Like, my big fandoms are the Muppets, Batman, and Star Wars, I would say.
I really, really want you guys to start that Muppets podcast you guys have been teasing.
It's never happening.
No, it's totally going to happen. You need to.
No, I can't talk about the Muppets publicly. I just weep. I can't do it.
I need to hear you weeping
I'm
about
dead
Muppets.
Serious. I'm dead serious. I can't do it.
Is it Rolf? Rolf makes me weep.
I don't know if you can see. No, it's Kermit. Can you see Kermit back there? I don't know.
Oh, there he is.
I have a replica photo puppet Kermit, like they used to take pictures of Kermit in the background there.
It's fantastic. Oh my gosh. All right. That's what I love about our discussion sessions. These aren't interviews. They're
free association.
They're just free association. I love it. But pulling us back a little bit back on track. I don't know. Anyway, I first started listening to Never Tell Me the Pods because of Kat and James and Johnny, your kind of rotating co-hosts. Uh-huh. And of course, they're best known for the brilliant Star Wars actual play podcast series called Campaign. And I'll do just about anything to hear more of that crew. So when I heard that they had a whole podcast where they're waxing poetic about Star Wars, I immediately downloaded. I think you guys only had like 3 or 4 episodes out when
you first started listening.
Yeah, something totally. Like that. Yeah. And the first 3 are still like mind-blowing to me.
Really? That's so interesting to me because I noticed that you linked to the first 3 in this discussion document.
Yeah.
And I actually have different suggestions for which ones I would like people to start with, so which we can get into later.
Absolutely. I'll put in links to whichever ones you want, but those first 3, they weren't what I was expecting, I think is probably what it was in that it really was like, oh, I get to sit in a room with other people who feel as passionate as I do about a thing. And I get to listen to them have the conversation that I would want to be having, right? So it's that therapy thing that you're talking about. And I'd never really heard, I mean, I'd heard podcasts about Star Wars and I've heard podcasts about gaming, and but it's different because what you guys are doing isn't like an interview process. It's not like a breakdown process. It's literally
It's free
like,
association.
it is free association with some hilarious kind of formatting, right? You know, there's
Lack of formatting.
sorry, I spaced it. What's the fashion segment you guys do?
Oh, peace is a lie. There is only fashion.
Yeah, exactly. So in that first thing, I was like, oh, this is just a nice, fun, casual sit down. But as I tell a lot of people, like any good geek conversation, it starts in a place of really let's talk about the Jedi and Sith codes, right? And what we like or don't like about this thing. But like within, I don't know, 45 seconds, it turns into a deep conversation about philosophy and theology and human nature and dogma and why do people follow certain aspects of certain codes and not others. And because that, to me, that's what geekdom is about, right? It's not just about like, hey, let's talk about, you know, would Lois Lane die if Superman actually caught her falling off a building?
Yeah.
You know, that may be where it starts, but then, you know, you get in a conversation about physics and about, you know, relativity and, you know, quantum mechanics. And, you know, it is a springboard like any good science fiction, space opera, superhero story, fantasy story. Though the best of those stories give us perspective, lets us turn the camera a little bit sideways on our own world and explore things in a different way. And I really think that's what Never Tell Me the Pods does. And it's one of the things that I really wanted to do with Whelmed, which was, yeah, I want to talk about Young Justice and talk about storytelling and stuff. But I also want to bring on people from all these different creative industries and have the people who are watching Young Justice and listening to our show hopefully be inspired to take the thing that they love and use that as a springboard to create their own, you know, quality material, to be, as my friend Lou Anders says, to be producers and not just consumers. Right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I have to say that in this garbage year, Never Tell Me the Pods is the best thing that's happened. And I've really enjoyed connecting with fan communities and really just being able to talk to fans from all walks of life who are creating stuff in Star Wars and did not exist in the fandom before. I think the thing that makes me most excited about Never Tell Me the Pods is that it came out after Episode 7 when there were a huge amount of lapsed fans and new fans coming into the community, which I really like.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about Star Wars, too, which is, I mean, ever since freaking Troops back in the 90s, right? There have been Star Wars fan films and fan fiction.
Troops was a fan film documentary, like, set in the 90s that I think was one of the first fan films that Lucasfilms really, like, sanctioned and, like, showed and gave awards to and stuff. Sorry, I just, for the point of...
No, absolutely. Troops...
I mean, you and I know what Troops are, but yeah. It's a parody of Cops.
It's a parody of Cops, and it's about what really happened to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru.
Yeah, it's very funny.
It's very funny and very quirky. And also for the day, which was in the 90s and very early, I remember watching it in the, you know, the very early age of the internet, you know, back in the dark ages. And it blew me away because even today, the special effects they were using is actually pretty impressive for... 20 plus years ago.
It's cool because the props also are so... That's one of the great things about Star Wars. If you want to make a fan film, there are people out there who are obsessed with getting the right number of nicks and like dents on Stormtrooper armor and putting it out there. So
yeah, anyway, Star Wars has been chocked full of fan fiction for a really, really good reason, and fan events. And, you know, the 501st, which is a group of individuals who around the world is an organization that are cosplayers who do a variety of Stormtrooper armor and Mandalorian armor and Darth Vader and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But they do way more than that. They are such a giving, supportive community.
Yeah, their motto is bad guys doing good.
Yeah, it's amazing. Every time I turn around, particularly in the podcast or geek community, I hear about the 501st raising huge amounts of money or showing up at children's hospitals. The inspiration of geekdom and what we can do with that passion is always floored me. And Star Wars, for me, you know, having seen it in the theater when I was 7 on my birthday back in 1977. It rocked and ruled my world for a very, very long time. And just to kind of steer it a little bit back toward Young Justice, I feel like Young Justice as an animated series can do the same thing. I've watched a lot of animation in my day, but Young Justice has a tightness and a depth and explores some unique themes, I think, and handles it so well that I feel like it can be just this great springboard to inspire people to see what can be done.
I think one connection between Star Wars and Young Justice might be that you can watch it on a very surface level and just enjoy sort of the spectacles and the action and that sort of stuff. But once you dig into a little deeper and start analyzing the characters, there's some very, very interesting stuff happen.
Yeah.
So it works on both a like meta level and a just fun action level.
Right. It's like how they make the films, theoretically. You don't have, of Star Wars, you don't have to know all of the, the 15 novels that came out leading up to, the Force Awakens release to be able to go to the movie and just enjoy the movie for what it is. As a big, enjoyable spectacle, or you can, catch the little references in the background And
it should be that way. My friend Michael Ben's little sister, actually, Sarah, loves Young Justice and has never picked up a comic book in her life. She was overjoyed to hear that it was coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked to, I guess it's surprising to me, but like we talked to a lot of fans. Well, Darcy Ross, who has already been on the show, talking about how she had never watched or read anything about DC because she, had a bad view of what DC really represents until she saw Young Justice. And again, that was one of the inspirations behind doing this show, was being able to talk about that rich history that you don't need to have to watch Young Justice. But if you do, you can see the layer upon layer upon layer of rich 80 plus years of history of comics in general, but DC specifically. I love Marvel, I love DC, I love all comics. I'm a big DC fan for some specific reasons, but, I've never been a Star Wars or Star Trek guy. I love Star Wars more, but I am a huge Star Trek fan as well. So
you're a Star Wars and Star Trek guy.
I am a Star Wars and Star Trek guy, yeah.
And I think everyone should be like that.
I like what I like, and I don't want to be in a category.
Yeah.
Completely random aside. So my first degree is actually in marine biology, which some people know, and that has fed into my gaming industry kind of springboard where I talk about gaming in underwater environments. But when I first started studying, my focus was on marine mammals, specifically marine mammal sleep physiology and bioacoustics. And I went to a marine mammal conference in Chicago. I would like to point out this was a marine mammal conference in Chicago in December.
Oh, okay. So ice mammals, I assume?
Basically ice mammal. Shed Aquarium had opened a new thing, and so we went there. The year before it was in Hawaii, and the year after that it was in like Florida. I'm like, I picked the wrong year to go to this conference. Anyway,
the wrong time.
Exactly. And when I got there, I was talking to people about it, and every time I turned around, somebody was like,
"Ice to meet you?"
Yes, exactly. No, that's not what they said. They would ask me like, "Are you a cetacean person or a pinniped person?" Cetaceans being dolphins and pinnipeds being seals and sea lions. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Oh, well, you can't like one and like the other as well. You have to pick a side or whatever. It was so weird to me. And
so was this just full of Finn boys?
Yeah, it was full of Finn boys. There it is. He's warming up.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry, I stepped on your line here, but I also wanted to see if they wanted to check your cetaceans.
Oh, that's so good, Pranks. So good.
So is this are we doing okay, or is this pace a little glacial for you? Should we move things on, or?
Yeah, we forgot to warn you. Never Tell Me the Pods, if you didn't tell by the title. It's a little
garbage.
It's punny. It's full of punny garbage.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
So, yeah, let's get back to Batman, though.
Well,
just because I'm worried that we're talking about Star Wars a lot, and I love that, but
no. This is what we do, and I think it's important. Okay. And I always have a method to my madness. And the reason why I wanted to have you on the show wasn't just to talk about, Young Justice and Batman, which we will get to for sure, but about the passion that you have for fandom in general, and how I think
it's pretty all right.
That informs what you do. This is literally what you do, is enjoy and dive into a fandom and not just discuss it on a deep level, but also support and encourage other people who have this level of passion for something, whatever it happens to be. You want to encourage people to not, be forced to be toned down in their excitement about life. And that's one of the things that I love about the show and about you as well. And speaking of that, so when the conversation on Twitter came up about doing a Young Justice focused podcast, I think your response was something like, caps lock, you have to make this happen. But I never got a chance to ask you why. And because I didn't know that you were like a Bat fan at the time, like, were you a huge Young Justice fan to the level where you felt like there was more that needed to be discussed about the show? Or what was the story behind that?
You want the real answer?
No, I want you to make up crap. Yes, I want the real answer.
The real answer is I'm a huge Rich Howard fan.
Oh, I said I wanted the truth.
No, I mean that I thought someone needed to do this for Young Justice because there is more there. And I thought that you could do for Young Justice what I'm doing for Star Wars with Never Tell Me Pods. That's honestly the reason.
Well, thank you. I hope that is the case. I do feel like Whelmed is kind of a culmination of all the things that I love and I get to talk about, but whether it's gaming, storytelling, comics, fandom, all that kind of stuff. It's like all the little keys I picked up in my whole life has allowed me to share Whelmed.
If I had infinite time, I would podcast about everything that I love. I would do this Muppets podcast, I would do a Batman podcast, and I would do Star Wars, but I don't. And so what I'm instead doing is finding people I really like and trust who I think can handle the subjects with seriousness, but also enough levity to keep people interested, and also people who I think can push the sort of inclusivity in fan spaces that needs to happen. And you are definitely one of those people.
Oh, thanks so much, Branks. I appreciate it.
That's a more elaborate answer than I'm just a Rich Howard fan, which is true, but not the whole story.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Well, I hope I do anything to make any of that happen. All right, so now that I'm entirely embarrassed, let's talk about the Bat Family.
Sure. Speaking of embarrassments, gosh, the Bat Family. Do we want to get into
This is what I wanted. So you and I have talked a little bit about your love of the Bat Family, but not a ton. But there's some specific stuff like that you have made reference to that I want to dive into, which is this father-son relationship. I'm assuming between Bruce and Dick, but I mean,
they're the original.
It could be across the board. I don't know if it includes, like Tim and Damien and Jason. Like, talk a little bit about your love for the Bat Family and what connects you.
I think there is a long-standing misconception that Batman is a loner intentionally. I think the best stories about Batman are ones in which he's grappling with trusting others, loving others, filling the hole that his parents left. What I like most about the Bat Family is that they reflect aspects of Batman's personality in ways that we don't get when he's just out there doing things by himself. Batman has, in his very, very first incarnations, he was alone. He was a lone Avenger, basically a clone of the Shadow or the Phantom or what have you.
Right.
And he was shooting giants with guns and mowing people down in his plane, and very violent and weird and still a grim Avenger. But Batman sort of coalesced, in my opinion, when he got Robin, and then later when he got Alfred. To me, the Bat Family really work because Bruce is in many ways still a child, and because he was robbed of that childhood, he adopts wards, he relates to them, he tries to help them work through their own issues. My least favorite versions of Batman are the ones which are self-consciously grim, gritty, and violent without any touch of the humanity that I feel he can display. One of the things that really makes me love Batman is the idea that he is human in a world full of demigods, of criminals who have superpowers, etc., etc. I know there's a cynical way of looking at it, which is to say that, well, he's rich and he has infinite training, so that's like a superpower too. But to me, the best Batman stories are the ones that display how a extremely damaged person who nevertheless wants to do good can overcome their own shyness, their own introversion, their own trauma to really connect and help a person. That's why one of my favorite Batman moments in the DC animated universe is of Batman holding the hand of Ace in Justice League Unlimited as she passes.
Guys, if you haven't seen that Justice League Unlimited episode, it's called Epilogue, and it ties the Batman Beyond universe with Terry McGinnis with the Justice League animated universe. And I agree with you. It is next to one of the moments in Young Justice, it is probably one of my absolute favorite moments of Batman in the animated series, of Batman, period.
I love that episode because it shows crotchety old Batman and what he's become after these years of toil and heartbreak. And you could say that he's alone and that he ends up alone and that he's sort of punished for what he does, but I don't read it that way at all.
Interesting.
I think one of the things that I love most about Batman is the idea that there are people who, like Batman, believe in service over their own happiness. Bats could choose to be happy, I feel like, in a lot of versions of himself, but he chooses not to be. He chooses to stay engaged and involved and save people. And I like that about him. When I was in college and when I was starting with the Teach for America program, my love of Batman accelerated even more because I was doing social justice stuff and I was doing something that like exhausted me deeply on a physical and emotional level every single day. But one of the things that kept me going was the idea that what you as a person need can sometimes be subordinate to what a city needs or to what an ideal needs. And you can't keep going forever when you're doing this. But what impresses me most about Batman is that he never, ever gives up. I'm very Manichean in my approach to things. I'm more uncomfortable with shades of gray, I think, than a lot of people in fandom and in philosophy.
What was that phrase you used? What did you say?
I'm very Manichean, like black and white. It's a religious philosophy, but it's also an order that sees things in terms of black and white. It's like an approach to thinking things.
I've never heard of that before. Interesting. Okay.
This is all very jumbled, but
You sound very cogent to me, so keep going.
I'm going to tie it back to the Bat family. It's constantly pointed out that for a person who has a reputation as a loner, he's got just loads and loads of sidekicks.
I keep picturing Robin in the first episode where he's like, "You're gonna clone us? No thanks. Batcave's crowded enough already."
Yeah, and then it's funny because later on he has to share it with younger siblings.
Right.
But I keep coming back to this idea of Batman as a damaged person wants to help other people avoid what he's becoming.
Yeah.
And that's a very attractive idea to me because I have my own issues to work through, and I like reading about someone who doesn't let their own shortcomings and doesn't let self-doubt creep into what they do. It can be dangerous to be certain that you're always doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm very uncomfortable with depictions of Batman as morally gray or excessively violent. I'm happiest when there's a version of him who I know has the best interests of everyone at heart, even if he's a little grouchy, a little grumpy. And to me, the Bat family really helps draw that out because it helps humanize him.
Yeah.
From the like weird sort of sitcom relationship that Bruce, Barbara, Dick, and Tim have in the DC animated universe to like the wider family, especially when Damian joins, you definitely have a like sort of weird Sound of Music Von Trapp situation with all of the Robins like lining up, and they fight like siblings, which I love.
Yeah.
You know, they're very protective of each other, but also very dismissive. They're very competitive. And you've got Batman as this weird sort of patriarch, and Alfred is another dad basically for all of them, but a much more emotionally in tune dad. Granddad, yeah, sure. And so one of the things that I loved most about Young Justice when I was first watching it was how there's this one scene where Batman is playing basketball with Robin.
Yeah.
And it's because Robin is angry and upset and just needs to work through stuff. And instead of putting him out on the streets and just telling him to, like, I don't know, punch a mugger or something like that.
Man up.
Or man up, which is even more toxic. Bruce plays basketball with him.
It's funny because like it is literally today, as we record this, that episode review was released, Downtime. And that moment is, again, one of my favorite moments. So I mentioned this a few times on the podcast, but for your sake, Pranks, I was talking with Darcy about like what happened between Bruce and Dick in the comics in the 5 years between season 1 and season 2 of Young Justice. And as we were discussing that on Twitter...
Oh, Greg Wiseman jumped in, right?
Yeah, Greg jumped in and he was like, yeah, don't make assumptions about like the angry, bitter split basically between Bruce and Dick. And I was like, dude, you can't leave me hanging like that. And so we had this conversation and he was very blunt. He was like, I've never understood why it needed to be that toxic between the two of them. Right.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it that way, but particularly now as a father myself, like, well, actually, I mean, Greg was like, I don't know anybody who punched their dad in the face like they did in the Batman animated series. And I was like,
yeah,
well, my brother and my dad, when my brother turned 18, almost got in a fist fight. So I do see how that can happen.
But I think there's room for both.
I do too. And the thing is, I think there's a part of me that's always felt like Bruce. I mean, the whole point of him adopting Dick in the first place was because he related to what Dick was going through and felt like he needed to help him. That's the whole core heart of the character point of Bruce adopting Dick in the first place. And so it's one of those things that after decades and decades of reading Batman comics that Greg pointed out and put up on the screen for Young Justice, that fantastic scene that to me ranks right up there with Batman holding Ace's hand as she passes away.
Absolutely.
Is the scene where Wonder Woman calls him out, or thinks she's calling him out. Basically, she's the voice box for the public view of what Batman is doing with Robin. So you adopted him so he could become you. And that Bruce Greenwood voiced poignant answer with that nice pregnant pause and then the I did it so he wouldn't. I paused the show and I'm tearing up a little bit right now. I paused the show so I could process how brilliant that moment was. And when rewatching it again, that echo of Bruce saying this is what he wanted for Robin, right? But never telling Dick that's what he wanted for him. And letting Dick make that decision for himself. And then having that moment where Dick is processing the fallout of Failsafe. He's talking to Canary and admitting to Canary that he doesn't want to be Bruce and understanding that he's not driven that way, that Bruce has helped him fix that thing that Bruce carries with him every single day so that he couldn't be the Batman if he wanted to be the Batman. Like from a writing standpoint, allowing Dick to make that choice as a protagonist himself is what you need to do that so few writers get right, right?
Yeah, it actually brings me back to that same episode of JLU with Terry and Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
Terry being the Batman Beyond, so he's about 30, Bruce is about 80, and we learn eventually that, spoilers, Terry is a clone of Bruce created by Project Cadmus, and Terry is furious because he thinks Bruce manipulated all of this and created him and planned all of it this way. But the brilliant part about that episode is when Terry finally confronts Bruce and is like, you knew I was a clone of you and you never said anything. And it's revealed that Bruce had a great deal of respect for Terry's adoptive father, if not biological father,
right? And
didn't want to say anything, didn't want to break up that nuclear family, and sort of let Terry come to the path of Batman by himself.
Yeah.
Which is a huge departure from the character of Batman in the animated series, who is extremely manipulative and very sort of mistrusting. But the brilliant thing about Young Justice is that when I see Bruce Greenwood's Batman as opposed to Kevin Conroy's Batman, I think Bruce Greenwood's Batman is a lot more well-adjusted.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he's a better relationship with Robin.
Yeah. Which brings me to one of the reasons why I'm a big Tim fan.
Yeah. Bruce Timm or Tim Drake?
Tim Drake. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we have some mutual friends who, think Tim is a dumpster fire for some reason. And it's fine because I get the viewpoint because the Tim now is not the Tim that I grew up on.
Tim now is pretty generic.
Yeah, which is unfortunate to me because Tim was so needed so badly at the time in which he was written.
Yeah.
I talk about it a little bit in our Robin episode. I won't rehash too much of it here, but the idea that there was so many things in the culture around that was informing what was happening in Batman. The fact that Jason Todd had died. The fact that it was the 90s and anti-heroes were on a massive rise.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gagging right now.
Wolverine has gotten his own miniseries, the Frank Miller, and Punisher was huge. And
earlier today, Kat said that...
Our friend Kat Cool
said that media often learns the wrong lessons from various works that are epoch-making, and one of the things she cited was Year One, and I definitely think comics learned the wrong lessons from Batman Year One.
Interesting.
And The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, I like Batman Year One.
I like those comics, I just don't like the tradition that was spawned out of them in other comics.
I see.
The grim and gritty 90s Punisher-style stuff.
Yeah, I hear you.
I love the source material, but what other lesser writers did with it is not what I like.
And I don't disagree with you. But in the 90s, what happened was really the writers of Batman were trying to answer the questions the fans were asking, which was, I want Batman to be darker. Why isn't Batman darker? We like dark. Yeah. Give us dark. Give us Batman doing terrible things. And the answer to that was, okay, well...
Azrael.
Yeah. Let us show you what that looks like. So we introduced Bane, who I did not like as a character at all. I thought he was this weird, generic, whatever. And then I read the Bane one-shot and I realized how deep a character he could be. And then
Yeah.
they broke Bruce's back. They went through the whole thing with Nightfall.
He's wonderful in Secret Six.
And he's brilliant even in the short clip we see in Young Justice. But they take Bruce out of the picture, and instead of handing the mantle to Dick, who didn't want it at the time anyway, they hand it to Azrael, the character of Azrael. And he gets powered armor, and he starts killing people, and it's just...
Awful.
It's awful. It's just awful. But the point is that that's when Tim entered the picture. And Tim being this brilliant intellectual detective / computer genius, like technology-wise, but also seeing and perceiving this change in Batman and bringing it in, speaks to exactly to what you were just saying about the Bat family grounding him and acting in some ways as a foil at times to have him witness his own humanity and give him something to stand for. And Tim, to me, being selfless in showing, he didn't show up in the Batcave because he wanted, I want to meet my hero. He showed up because he was worried and saying, you are becoming something I don't think you want to be. And I think the reason is because I'm pretty sure Robin died and you need help, and that was a compassion and a giving and an interesting twist to a character after Jason Todd was just terribly used, in my opinion, back in the day. Much more interesting now, but not then.
I love that Tim is brilliant and compassionate, but not as damaged as Bruce. I didn't like when they took his dad away and then they killed girlfriends of his, and just I hate fridging in general, but it just felt like Tim got a lot of bad breaks later in the 90s as they attempted to make him a more generic hero full of dead sidekicks and girlfriends and family members, as opposed to the brilliant, compassionate kid that he was initially.
Yeah, that's too bad. The Robin miniseries with him in it and him training with Lady Shiva and how
I love
how
it.
that evolved was such a good bit.
And because it's Tim realizing that one of his weaknesses is in fighting and combat. He's not as athletic as Dick. He's not as brawly, or he's not a street fighter the way Jason was.
Right.
And so he's like, I have a weakness. What's the best way to do this? And because it's Tim, he's like, I'll challenge an unbeatable assassin.
Right.
I love it.
And he would approach fights and combats much more intellectually,
yes, absolutely.
I need to not die. Right?
Yeah.
But plus, that's when they introduced the new costume, which was fantastic.
The Chikatabi boots and the awesome gorget.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just fantastic. And it desperately needed upgrade to Robin as a character.
Which they brought to the Young Justice Robin.
Well, and that's just it, too. The idea that, that modernization confused some fans who knew Tim, and they were like, he's a computer hacker, and he's got the new...
So he must be Tim.
It must be Tim and not Dick, which is not an unfair assumption, but I'm glad that it was Dick.
Well, but these days... If you're Robin, you have to be fluent in computer hacking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it only makes sense. The problem is that those were some of the unique characteristics of Tim. And so Tim in Young Justice is unfortunately a little bland. And Tim in the Batman animated series was much more Jason Todd than he ever was really Tim
he was much
Drake.
More Jason Todd.
So, unfortunately, Tim gets lost in the shuffle now, and that may be reflective of what's happening with him in the comics as well, being a little bit more bland and uninteresting a character, and they're trying to make him interesting by, fridging everyone he loves, and...
Well, he's also sandwiched in between two grimdark jerkhole Robins.
That's fair.
Who, I like them as characters, but relative to Damian and Jason, Tim comes off as bland because he's not a psychopath.
I don't think taking him down a psychopath dark path is what is the right move. It should be the other way around. Yeah.
I totally agree.
He should be the shining beacon of the Robins is what he should be, in my opinion.
Well, despite having a tortured relationship with Bruce in a lot of ways, Dick is very charismatic and happy and open, and I think there's room for two of those on the Robin family. Don't you?
Yeah, I do, and I think Tim could, really, you'd have to go back and retcon a lot of stuff that's happened, but, you could turn Tim to 11 on that front. Dick is very charismatic, and he's a leader of people, but he's had pretty terrible tragedy in his life, and I think Tim could be more hope than Dick is. Dick isn't hope. Dick is still strategy and charismatic and leader and supportive and uplifting, but you wouldn't necessarily see him making a hope speech,
Dick is too world-weary and has worked with Bruce for too long to be wide-eyed the way Tim can be.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think distinguishes Tim from Dick is that by the time Tim rolled around, I get the sense that Bruce is a better parent, and so a lot of the mistakes he made with Dick could be reflected in Tim in raising a more emotionally healthy Ward.
Yeah, more emotionally healthy vigilante.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so during some of this previous conversation that we had about the DC universe, you had mentioned something about having taught a class. What was that all about?
Ah, gosh. Okay, so I was part of an organization called Splash Chicago, and at the University of Chicago, I, with my friend William, taught a class on The Dark Knight to a bunch of high schoolers, and it was sort of a survey course.
So did you say taught a class on The Dark Knight Returns, like the comic?
No, Batman.
Oh, just in general.
Batman.
Okay.
The Dark Knight had just come out, so we did cover it. But we talked about real-world methods of criminology that he uses. We talked about the history of the character. We talked about where some of the bases for Batman are, like, Hamlet and, like, the Shadow and that sort of lineage of stuff.
Nice.
And I taught it dressed as Batman, which was a lot of fun. I had, like, a goofy costume with, like, built-in plastic abs.
Nice.
There's this ridiculous picture of me on one of these Chicago magazines, which has me with a cowl down, so it's just like my wild college era hair and my glasses. And then behind me is a PowerPoint with Ra's al Ghul on it and me pointing. It's just ridiculous. It's like one of my favorite pictures that I've had taken of me. But
we need to put that in our resources page. Can please send us a copy of that for sure.
Sure, if you want. It's ridiculous. But yeah, the kids were really into it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because we had chatted about this teaching thing, and as we were talking, I realized I also kind of taught a class, sort of. I was in a speech class in community college, and our speech teacher was actually really cool. Nobody wants to take speech, usually. But the speech teacher was cool. She was like, I don't want you to tell me what you're going to give me a speech on ahead of time. I don't want to see the outline. I don't want to see anything. I want to be experiencing this presentation the way that, everybody else is experiencing it. Nice. But I will give you some guidelines of what you can't do, right? It has to be appropriate for a classroom. You can't, teach us how to throw a baseball or whatever, right? We don't want a travel log of your vacation, that kind of stuff, right? And it has to be college level. Don't teach us to make oatmeal or whatever.
Sure.
Outside of that, she's like, I don't care what it is. So what I did was I walked into the class that day with a suit and a briefcase, and I put the briefcase on the desk, and I popped open the briefcase, and I pulled out a book of Shakespearean poetry.
Nice.
It was a big hardback book of Shakespearean poetry, and I read a page from Sandman's Dream of a Thousand Cats.
Okay.
But I had tucked the comic in the book, so nobody knew what I was reading.
So everybody thought that's awesome.
Right, so I started reading it, and people were like, wait, what is this? Right? And I got to the end and I was like, what I have in my hand is a teacher's nightmare. And I pulled the comic out of the, textbook and then started talking about the evolution of comics and what they were like and,
Very cool.
The removal of the Comics Code Authority. And I was able to do it without a note card too, because I had ordered all the comics I was using as examples, in the order of my speech in my briefcase, and was showing the 60s Hawkman versus the Hawk World miniseries had just come out. Yep. The Longbow Hunters had just come out, etc., etc., etc.
So this was in the 80s?
This was 89, I want to say.
I don't remember because I wasn't there, but I read up on comics histories.
Yeah. Well, and there were good examples of the change from the Comics Code Authority, which was going through that evolution, and Vertigo had just come out as a spinoff of DC Comics as an experiment, basically, for DC to say, we think the Comics Code Authority is irrelevant, but we don't want to take that chance with our main titles. So we'll do Vertigo, tell everybody ahead of time these are not Comics Code Authority approved, and see what happens.
In a way, Marvel already popped the top of that Pringles can with Spider-Man in 71, so... and that was a flagship character.
Kind of, but not really. It was definitely a tester balloon.
It was only for 3 issues.
Yeah, but there were also other things that just made it like a rubber stamp ridiculousness. I mean, you literally have an issue of Green Arrow in the 70s with Speedy on the cover shooting heroin.
Yep. I can't believe my ward, Speedy, is doing heroin.
Right. Where did that nickname come from? Yeah, and it's a great issue, and it's kind of a cornerstone storyline.
We're talking about the Green Arrow, Green Lantern series here by Neal Adams, I believe.
Drawn by Neal Adams, but I can't remember who the writer was. I'd have to go back and look. But I mean, it literally has a needle in his arm. These were things that were happening where people, I guess, maybe thought the Comics Code Authority was relevant, and I don't know. I mean, it's been so long in history now, the Comics Code Authority. Do you know much about the Comics Code Authority from a legal standpoint, being a lawyer and all? Do you know much about...
Yeah, the first thing to say about it is that it's not government. It's an association,
I don't. What does that mean?
Oh, okay. So the Comics Code Authority it's like the ESRB, which creates...
Oh, the movie ratings and video game ratings and stuff like that?
Yeah, like the Motion Picture something association. It's not government regulation. It's self-regulation by comics publishers.
Okay.
So basically, like, it's a group of people who you submit comics to, and then they get the stamp, basically.
Gotcha. The way that I understand it too it was basically like a spin-off or instigated by the kind of McCarthy era 50s, 60s vendettas they were having against things like horror comics and stuff from the book Seduction of the Innocent.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's more a response to Frederick Wertham, really.
Bogus garbage research about, pop
Right.
culture influence on kids and just
Yeah.
it was nuts. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know who wrote that book. I couldn't remember his name. Do you know? Can you talk about that at all? Do you have any?
I mean, he's basically a hack who later was revealed to have all sorts of like ridiculous proclivities himself, and so
Shocking. I'm shocked.
yeah, I know. He just like read into a bunch of stuff and like, I don't know. There's always moral panic people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some, like, from the animated series kind of standpoint, there's always kind of some limits of certain things, like how much red can you use that implies blood for a whole season.
Yeah, that's why in early Batman the Animated Series, they often had him fight robots when they really wanted to destroy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they just found robots to be a convenient shorthand because, sorry, Michael Ben, but people don't care when droids are destroyed.
Yeah, well, echoing back, like, if you go back and watch the Super Friends, like, one of their tenets back in the day was they could not do anything even remotely violent in the direction of something that looked humanoid.
Yeah.
Not even actual humans versus humanoid robots, or it looks like a
Right.
human, but it's really an android. No, that's why the androids were so absurdly, boxy and, that kind of thing.
And that's why they always had the characters in Super Friends doing things like being in a car and picking someone up, or like carrying a building, or like putting out a fire, just stuff that isn't particularly violence oriented.
Right, exactly. Which was what kind of broke the mold with Batman the Animated Series in many ways, because when they did a lot of this stuff, kind of that, what they dubbed kiddie noir, you could do some things with these dark colors and dark backgrounds and implications of things in your storytelling without actually showing the things, which in some ways can be more poignant and or horrifying.
Disturbing.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, they didn't have lasers and stunners. They had full-on Tommy guns, and that kind of thing, which is interesting about how that kind of also broke the mold. But when you skip to Superman, the animated series...
They're back to lasers in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But that's a practical thing, right? Because you can't shoot Superman with bullets.
Well, in a way, too. But also, like, that reflection of the animated series Metropolis versus the animated series Gotham is...
Oh, God, I love that dichotomy.
Yeah, is meant to be this...
New York by day, New York by night.
Kind of, yeah. But I know, see, the thing is with Batman the Animated Series, I never thought of, even though, yes, technically Gotham should be New York, I always picture it a lot more like this mishmash of like San Francisco and Los Angeles and like basically all major cities. Like there's literally a Golden Gate Bridge basically in the Batman Animated Series. So it's this mishmash of major cities. And I always pictured in some of the comics that I read in the 70s and 80s, Metropolis wasn't New York at all. It was literally a metropolis of connection of multiple larger cities, that were more kind of in the Midwest, which is interesting.
I think everybody has a different Gotham in their mind's eye, and there's a relatively consistent geography, at least in the comics now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's too important necessarily to like tie it to a city. I just said the New York by day, New York by night thing, not because I was trying to make the point that it was New York,
no, of course,
but just because I was trying to make the point that there were two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the same universe, too, and showed those great shades of those two heroic characters that are very different. So, when did you hear about the season 3?
The same day you did, and then I believe I texted you, DM'd you, G-chatted you. I believe there was a messenger pigeon as well.
Definitely a Twitter announcement. Yeah. I think I was referred to as Young Justice Dad is on it. Yes. I think is what you said. Yeah.
Yes, I did. I did say that.
I mean, did you just run across? Because I hadn't heard it yet. I mean, you guys blew up my phone. Oh, you guys meaning the internet. No, seriously, what were you doing? Were you working that day, or were you?
Yeah, I was working. It was a slow day at work, and I tend to wait on these things until I get double confirmation because now that people talk to me about Star Wars stuff, I've found how.
Oh God, I can't even imagine.
Like they'll send me something, and it usually takes me like 5 to 10 minutes before I decide whether it's real or not.
Right, yeah. I get it. For years, we keep getting these, announcements for the season 3 that's why I was, even though it was, was it IGN? Even though it was like a website that should probably know better and not just some random comic news site I've never heard of, I was still like, everybody, please, like, let's hold off. I don't want to. I just can't take it.
I just fundamentally don't trust entertainment coverage anymore. And so I am skeptical of almost everything I see about properties I really care about unless I can verify it.
Mm-hmm. And that's a direct reflection of like Star Wars and Never Tell Me the Pod's popularity and that kind of stuff. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. So, long story short, I really wanted you to verify this before I got excited. But being me, I decided to take 6 different ways of getting in touch with you.
It's okay. It was fantastic. What kind of stuff do you want to see in a season 3? What stuff jumped out at you in the first 2 seasons that kind of you would like to see explored?
Gosh, man, the Kirby stuff.
Oh, really?
I feel like that's the thing that wasn't fleshed out as well. Like, we got hints of Darkseid. Obviously, Glorious Godfrey's there. And I want to see stuff that they didn't do in the animated series. So I would like them to fill the gaps of some of that. I would love to see more Tim and fleshed out Tim. And once Tim has come into his own, I would love to see Damian. Because I feel like there's room for multiple Robins out there. I want to see Stephanie.
Do you want to see a Stephanie Robin or do you want to see a Stephanie Batgirl?
This is a very tough question to me because I have a few opinions on Stephanie. One is that her series as Batgirl is one of the best series ever. It's really, really well written, really great. But I think girls should be Robin and can be Robin. But I also think that the Stephanie Robin was treated very poorly by the comics.
Really badly.
And was just used to make Tim sadder.
I have no argument with that. Yeah.
I don't trust them to handle Stephanie as Robin, but I would like to see a female Robin. So I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yeah, could be a mixed bag.
But I want to see her as a character, definitely. I want Cass. I love Cass.
Oh, yeah.
Very interesting character to me. Cassandra Cain, for listeners.
Cassandra Cain, who was another Batgirl, who was also raised by the League of Shadows. So, like Damian.
Her father's David Cain. And I think she's Lady Shiva's daughter, too.
I'd have to look that up. I'm not a Cass expert.
Anyway, Bat Family aside, I want to see a lot of the New Gods, and I want to see Darkseid. I am very covetous of the JLU/DC Animated Universe Darkseid. I feel like that voice and the way that was handled is one of the creepiest and best villains ever.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think there's a way to really improve on that, but truth be told, before I saw Young Justice's Lex Luthor, I thought that the Clancy Brown Lex Luthor was the be-all, end-all.
Yes.
And now they're pretty close in my mind. Like, sometimes I like one of them better, sometimes I like one of them worse. And the thing that just blew me away about Young Justice, man, is that Young Justice came at a time when I was kind of dissatisfied with the direction that the comics were actually going.
Right.
And I was worried that I would never get the feeling that I get when I watch the DC Animated Universe again. And Young Justice has shown me that it's a different creative team. It brings in a lot of elements from the DCAU that are cool and great, including just a lot of approaches to characters, streamlining them, that sort of stuff. But it's not the DC Animated Universe. It's doing its own thing, and it's improving on it in some ways, and that's very cool to me. So I'd like to see more areas that the DCAU didn't touch. Gosh, specific to Young Justice, expanding on Atlantis would be cool. I think more of the Aqua family would be nice to see. Oh, Wonder Girl was kind of not really explored in Season 2.
Was not explored in Season 2. She was directly referenced. Basically, her mother was the scientist who was kidnapped in the video game.
Yes, I did play the video game a little bit.
Yeah, by the time this airs, we'll have already had Neal Powell on talking about the details of the video game. So I would like to see that as well, which means we might also see this kind of relationship they hinted at between Wonder Girl and Tim. So
nice, good.
Yeah.
Miss Martian and Beast Boy are sweet. I want episodes focusing on their relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's cute and fun.
I think their tying of Miss Martian in with...
Brilliant move. The origin of Beast Boy's powers.
Absolute
Brilliant.
Genius, yeah. It just blows my mind when I think about the connection they made like that.
Oh, I'd like to see some of the icon heroes, more of them.
Oh, the Milestone heroes? Yeah.
Yeah, the Milestone heroes.
There's apparently some issue with certain copyright things going on with Icon, and I don't know why.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I should check that out.
He was supposed to be in some of the comic issues. Like, he was on the cover of some promotional covers for some of the comics and then ended up not being on the final draft of the comics or in those stories for some reason. Yeah, you can check that out on the YJ Wiki. They talk about that a little bit as well. So
cool.
I'm hoping we get more Icon and Rocket. I thought the use of Icon in Season 2 was great. The fact that the echoes of him being a lawyer as well, which I would like to see some more of that. For your sake, a good lawyer superhero besides Daredevil, I guess.
Yeah, I don't need lawyers in my media.
I don't even know what to say to that, Pranks. That's really funny. I would like to see better nurses in my media myself. So wrapping up, is there anything else you'd like to add to this detailed conversation?
I don't really think so. I think we covered quite a
Covered
lot.
pretty much everything.
Yeah, we had a great rap session.
Outstanding. Well, thanks for so much for spending time with us in the Cave, Pranks. And where can people find you out and about on Earth Prime?
Well, you can find my podcast at nevertellmethepods.com, and you can find me on Twitter at RogueTLDR, which is to say RogueTLDR. Never Tell Me the Pods is also on Facebook if you search for us, and that page is managed by Livy Watkinson, who is a gem.
Mm-hmm. She's fantastic.
And yeah, I guess that's all I got.
I recommend you checking in with Pranks about any questions you have about Star Wars. Never Tell Me the Pods is hands down one of my favorite podcasts. If you love Star Wars, I can't recommend the show highly enough. I think I've made that clear. But from the sometimes hilariously absurd humor to those deep insights on storytelling and human nature and culture and myth, Never Tell Me the Pods lets you sit in on some of the geekiest brilliance that you will ever hear. We've made it easy for you to check out. As Pranks mentioned earlier, we have links to the first 3 episodes, and we will also include links to any of the episodes that Pranks recommends. Anything, like, which ones are you thinking of, Pranks, out of curiosity?
I really think that the Dathomir episode,
that's a good
the
one.
episode where we talk about the Sith, and the episode where we talk about the Jedi.
Yeah, those are my favorites for sure. And I think it's episode 3, which is Sith Happens, might be episode 3.
Oh, yeah, maybe it is. Yeah.
But you have a separate one that's just the Jedi focus as well. That's later on, much later on,
Yeah.
I think.
That's Jedi Poodoo.
Jedi Voodoo. Yeah, those are fantastic episodes. So thanks everyone for sharing some time with us. You can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files, on Facebook as well at www.facebook.com/crashingthemode, and on our website www.crashingthemode.com. If you enjoy the show, please consider sharing it with a friend. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. The ratings help others find the show. If you do leave us a rating, please let us know, especially if you're outside the US. We have to look a little harder to find those reviews and ratings. And even though Season 3 has been officially announced, please continue to spread the word to friends and family about the series. Hashtag Keep Binging YJ on Netflix. Hashtag Young Justice Season 3 if you are talking about that online. Pick up the comics, get yourself up to speed for the Season 3 premiere, and as always,
stay whelmed, everyone.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.